Moriden Athluan.
The story of his near single-handed assault on Windhelm and his execution of the traitor Ulrich Stormcloak of Windhelm are staples of the Imperial Legion. His devotion to duty, his zeal in combat, his dedication to the safety of the Empire and its citizens are told to all new recruits of the Legion.
Though his actions in the Civil War were what drew the eyes of all Tamriel to him, it is not what he is best known for. No, for it was after his days in the Legion that he began to show his true dedication to both the gods and the people of the Empire.
Come now and hear the tale of the Moriden Athluan's glorious mercenary days, and the great good that he did for all the people of Skyrim.
The bards can
worked
always
the
be
gods'
trusted
names.
to take a story and turn it to their own ends. There are elements of truth to their story. The truth, though, the truth is not what the bards would have you believe. Hearthfire, 4th Era, 201. The first thing I noticed when I entered the ruin was the sound of running water. I couldn't find a place for the sound to be coming from, but it surrounded me, seeming to come from everywhere all at once. The second, the next room, was a pile of bodies surrounding a small plinth of some kind. At first it seemed unremarkable, except for the bodies, of course. As I got closer, however, it got far more interesting when a bowl of orange light illuminated at the plinth's top. I approached cautiously. Clearly, this was deadly somehow. A quick search of the bodies gave me nothing. The general disrepair of their armor screamed bandit, but I couldn't be sure of such. What was certain was that neither was khajiit. I tried to ignore the glowing sphere, but as I searched the room it became obvious that there were no other exits, which means either that Udrasi is not here, and never was, or that the orb might be part of a hidden entrance of some kind. Given that what I have seen of the interior so far is far smaller than the exterior suggested, I gambled on the second option. I touched the orb. The orb took off from the plinth as though it were on fire, which, now that I think on it, it might actually be. The sound of what I can only describe as an alarm of some kind screamed as cage walls shot up from the floor, surrounding me and preventing my escape. The light circled the cage, disorienting me with the ever-shifting light. Then it went out. The alarm silenced, and I waited for the cage to drop. It never did. I did, as the floor opened up beneath me, and I plunged hundreds of feet to what I was certain would be my death. Instead, I splashed down, painfully, in a thankfully deep pool or underground lake. I pulled for the surface, desperate to get clear of the water itself and figure out where I was and, more importantly, how to get out of it. My first views from a rock in the middle of the lake were not promising. Though I was sure I'd seen a rock bridge and some lights as I'd flown past them in my plummet, I could see no such evidence now from where I stood. Then I saw something against a far wall as my eyes adjusted to the near darkness, and it made me even less certain of my survival. If I understood what I was looking at, then if there was a way out, it was going to be through one of the least understood peoples of Tamriel, the Falmer. It was not much further on that I found the object of my search. Udasi Dro, brother of Makara. It was not a joyful moment, nor do I look forward to delivering the news to Makara when I escape this place. He had not been dead long, as the body was still warm, but the cause of his death was not hard to figure out. His legs had been broken, shattered, really, by his own fall down the same long shaft I had. The bones had broken the skin, and with no ability to heal himself, he had slowly bled out over days. Days alone, in the dark. I can't begin to imagine. Days to consider what he had done, the way he had left Makara angry. Days to consider that he had listened to anyone. He might still be alive. Days to remember he had paper, ink, and quill. He'd crawled to the feeble light of a glowing mushroom and penned one last letter that laid out all of his regrets, his apologies. They will not make Makara feel better, I think, but they will be a comfort of sorts. Assuming I get out of here myself. My concern about the Falmer were proven only a short time later. I struggled to recall anything I could about them, anything useful about them, I should say, as I could recall story after story that accentuated their deadliness, fondness of poisons, and their relationship with some kind of giant insect that they would feed captives to. In time, I had a short list. I knew they were blind, but that they were very attuned to sound. I knew nothing else. But that little bit encouraged me. The sound of running water was deafening still, which made any noise I might make more likely to be lost in the background, and with them being blind, that was my primary worry. I moved forward as silently as I could, bow held ready to defend myself if it was required again. The Falmer turned out to be the least of my problems. I hadn't been wrong. There had been a bridge lit up during my fall. I'd just turned a corner and found it when I saw something far more concerning on it. Not a fire, but a spectral form. I stayed in the shadows, watching it, trying to determine how much of a threat it was to me, when 3 Falmer charged onto the bridge from another path and attacked it. Thinking that we might now have a common enemy, I put arrow fire into the Falmer, only to have the apparition turn on me as well. Took all I had to hold the thing off. My arrows it ignored. My flames were as nothing to it. Only the silver sword I had been carrying around was of any use, and the entire time we fought it screamed at me that the stars are not for you. I had no idea what it was talking about. But when it finally fell, I found, in the goo that was its corpse, some kind of cube. I want nothing more than to get out of here and never come back. And yet, this cube has me wondering what might be down here to defend, even after death. The path continued upwards for a time, before sloping down once more, and then became damp as water seeped through the rock to collect in a small stream. In time, that stream became deep enough that my footing became treacherous, and I had to spend as much time checking my steps as I did looking for more Falmer. There were none. In time, the cave widened out even more before dropping into a largish cavern full of bandits. Well, 3 of them, anyhow, all of whom were quickly dispatched, but their presence told me I was near to escaping from Kagranzel. Whatever that Dwemer death trap was about, there were certainly no riches there. I emerged from the cave into a mountain pool, one I had passed several times when I had been camping here with the Legion, which meant I knew where I was and how to get back to Makara, still up at the top of the mountain, waiting for my return. I decided not to show her the quick way down. Even if she survived it, she'd also see the corpse of her brother, and that would not go well. I found Makara on a small rise, looking down on Skyrim with a thoughtful look on her face when I returned. When she turned and saw me, she knew what I'd found. I didn't say anything, simply handed her the note. She read it, tears streaming through her fur. Like Private Marad's mother, she couldn't thank me for this. She tried, anyway, pushing through her grief to try to tell me she'd appreciated what I had done for her. We broke camp. On the trip down the mountain, she decided that there was no reason for her to return to Morrowind. Instead, she would remain here in Skyrim and try to go on living. Udasi would want that, she was certain. She also offered to be a continuing traveling companion should I choose to, but for this moment, I had to decline. I had no idea what I was going to do with myself. As it was, I wouldn't drag someone else along as I tried to figure it out. I did accompany her back to Windhelm, however, and if she cried a few more times in her grief, I tried not to take notice of it, nor did I comment. Grief is a personal thing. If she wanted my words, she'd let me know. Otherwise, I would leave her to puzzle her way through it on her own. This is not to say that the walk home was uninterrupted. Far from it. We met up with the Legion formation, transporting a prisoner along the way, and because of them, their idiocy, we had all the excitement we needed for the day. You see, they knew the dragons were back, so when they saw one perching on a rock formation, their youthful zeal and desire for death led them to shoot at the dragon, to try and kill it instead of the sensible thing and run as quickly as possible from it. Once the arrows were fired, however, there was nothing for it but battle. But I swear if they live through this, I will yell at them so hard, so long, and so much that they will think that the general has gotten hold of them. Only one of the troopers survived, along with the prisoner. I stayed with them the remainder of the way to the city, along with Makara. I didn't say a word to that survivor until we got to the gates. I ended up not reprimanding him, just asking the names of the 2 who had died. When the soldier gave them, haltingly, I nodded, and told him that the next time he felt like being a hero, to remember those names, and what had come of them. He was suitably chastised at that point. He had seen what the dragon had left of them. The day was not over for me. Even as I entered the gates, I was betrayed twice over. The first was the owner of the Nisus Corner Club. I've spoken of it before, one of the few places of respite I had before I left the city. I gave a friendly greeting, which he returned by spitting on the ground at my feet I was taken aback, surprised. When I asked why, he spoke his mind. Told me how the rest of the Grey Quarter saw my actions as only making things worse. Sure, things had been bad under Stormcloak, but at least they'd known where they stood. Now nobody was sure. There was more fear, more citizens of the city punishing them for my actions, and fewer guards or legionnaires to prevent it. I argued that it would all settle down, that I had done all of it for them. He spat back in my face I'd only done it for myself, and told me never to show my face in the quarter again. Fresh off that, a Legion courier found me and delivered a letter. The general sent his respects, thanked me for my service, and regretted to inform me that with the war over, the Legion did not have a current use for an irregular with my specific skill sets. And so I was to be transferred to the inactive reserve list. In short, I'd been cut loose and abandoned by the Legion as well. Which means I was alone on the streets of Windhelm once again. And I had no idea what I was going to do about it. What does a war veteran do when the war that made him great is over? When even the ones who made him great have abandoned him? I pondered that question into the long night, and when the sun rose, I still hadn't found an answer. 1 Frostfall, 4th Era, 201. Obviously, I didn't sleep well. I had gotten my revenge some days ago and was now finding that there was life to be lived afterwards. That every road I'd thought open to me was being shut in my face. Windhelm was no longer home, and really I'm not sure it ever had been. Despite all I'd done for it, its people spat on me, reviled me. I even heard myself referred to by a new name. Moriden Stormkiller. I went up to the common room of the Candlehearth to ponder that morning. Whiterun was a possibility. Lydia had shown interest in furthering my military training when I was last there, and she'd seen me working in the training yard of Yavaska. Of course, without the funds to buy a home there, my title would be essentially empty. And though I'd have her loyalty, such as it was, that wasn't going to keep me funded and alive. It would not give me purpose. A sudden fit of rage had me pounding on the table, and in doing so, a flyer was dislodged and fell to the ground. I picked it up and after a brief glance, stopped and read it closer. By the time I'd finished reading it, I had become thoughtful. This flyer offered an opportunity. It was something I'd done before, if Corvinian counted, or Bleakfall's Barrow, and it might be a way to earn funds to buy that home in Whiterun. What it offered was a job, a seeker of artifacts. The Museum of Solitude had long been shuttered, but it seemed a new curator had taken hold of the place and was trying to get it off the ground again. This new curator, one Aryan by name, had put out the call for any willing to seek artifacts in Skyrim to apply, in person, at the Museum in Solitude. If I'd had a drink to finish, I'd have done so with a single gulp at this point. It was a thin branch on which to hang my hopes, but that was better than no branch at all. Once again I left Windhelm, heading for Solitude and a new life. When I reached the first crossroads, though, I paused. My thoughts about Whiterun rose to my mind again, and I realized I had a stop to make before going to Solitude. No matter how things turned out, I owed the Jarl at least an appearance. I'd not been back since the Battle of Windhelm, and as I was the hero of that battle, and one of his thanes, I was certain he'd want to at least hear the tale. And then there was Lydia. How was having a Thane without a home or even a job affecting her? The least I could do was offer to bring her with me to Solitude. I was guessing, but from the flyer there was likely to be lots of tombs to delve, ruins to raid, and so forth. Perhaps having her along to continue my martial training wouldn't be such a bad thing. I turned south, towards Whiterun. Not all of the locals were upset over the results of the recent war, it turned out. I passed one such group, drunk, discussing the merits of mead against wenches, though I didn't hear the full debate, thankfully. Somehow, the women were coming out on the short end of that discussion. I couldn't avoid at least getting a drink from them as I passed them by, and when I last saw them, they were toasting the hero of the Civil War, Moriden Stormkiller. I'm going to hate that name. I can tell already. When I was presented to the Jarl, he had both the steward and Irileth in attendance, of course. I wasn't here to make requests or any other such nonsense, just to report on the events of the Battle of Windhelm and my current plans. They had some idea of how the war had ended, of course. The Legion had given them the briefest of updates before the majority of them packed up and left without much of a word. The Whiterun Guard is back in full control of the city's defenses again, so there's that. Of course, the Greymane family is about as put out about the whole thing as can be expected as well. They are definitely on the outs with the court at large here in Whiterun, but as I don't play the politics here, I don't pay much attention to that small aspect of things. I also spoke on my intention to head to Solitude, and why. I'd expected a disapproving frown or two, but got quite the opposite. The Jarl did wag his finger at me when he discovered I hadn't been up to High Hrothgar and the Greybeards yet, but otherwise said he approved of a man who saw to his own needs and refused to rely on the charity of others. At the end, he reinforced that when I was in a better position, one where I'd be able to settle more permanently in Whiterun, they would be more than welcoming. So at least there is one group who has not turned their backs on me. And then, of course, there was Lydia. When first I met her, she was brutally honest with me about her opinions about me and my worth. I thanked her for that then. Tonight, I returned the favor. I was brutally direct about my situation, and hence hers, here in Whiterun, about what I felt needed to be done, how I didn't want Stormkiller to be all that I was, nor to rely on it either. She listened patiently. She agreed that she'd had to put up with a lot of guff from the other housecarls, even a few of the local citizenry, though that had eased considerably in the last week or so since the war ended. When I mentioned that I wanted to become the hero that a Thane was intended to be, she nodded slowly in agreement, and there was a slight upturn to one side of her mouth that might have been the barest hint of a smile. It was agreed then. She would come with me to Solitude and assist me with training, and not just in combat. She knows the local politics here, as well as bits and pieces of it in the other holds as well. Things that can keep me out of trouble, things that I might need to know to navigate the system more smoothly. I've never really had a companion before. Not one who was with me because of who I was, not what I could do for them. I wonder how well this will truly work. 2 Frostfall, 4th Era, 201. The roads are far more employed than I have seen in recent weeks. I imagine travelers feel safer, knowing that the war is over and that they are less likely to be accosted on the roads. Of course, that doesn't take into effect the return of the dragons, but as they seem to be relatively few in number, despite the number of them I've seen since their return, perhaps that hasn't become a true problem for them yet. I spent the time on the road speaking with and getting to know Lydia. I find her wry sense of humor appealing, though she had what I would consider naive notions of righteousness and morality. She sees the world as a black and white affair. Either a thing is right, or it is not. Given what she's told me of her upbringing, I understand it. But when your very survival relies on ignoring such concepts, your view is substantially different. That aside, we agreed on a great deal, including the state of my arms training. Though my archery skills are getting to be quite keen, a fact she acknowledged as being useful, my skills with blade and shield are sorely lacking. I have a lot of ground to make up there, which I freely admit. She's not a fan of light armors either, preferring heavier pieces herself, but agreed that given my current skills and experience, it was likely a better choice anyhow. Robber's Gorge had been a ruined fortress that I have more or less avoided, mostly because there was no way I was going to challenge that many brigands at the same time, but also because there were no good sightlines for archery unless they were dumb enough to stay on the walls. These, in the past, have not been. With Lygia behind me, however, I was curious to see how well we could fight and communicate during such an encounter. We'd had a few animals to fend off during the trip, but those had gone smoothly enough, so it was time to test us as a pair. It was a slaughter. The hour she spent telling me what I had done wrong with my shield and sword afterwards was equally chilling. But at least I am alive to learn, and she is willing to teach, so there is that. The distraction of it all, though, meant we were going to have to stop early, likely in Dragon's Bridge, rather than push through to Solitude tonight. Likely a good decision anyhow. The 4 shields is far cheaper.